Welcome to the Independent Artists Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, a glassblower. Join us as we explore the topics that affect the lives and livelihoods of art show artists.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It's a beautiful day in downtown Santa Fe, and I am in a foul mood.
Well, there you go. We haven't done that yet here on the podcast.
We haven't recorded in the evening either. I'm not going to say it's Miller time because I'm drinking a fine Santa Fe Brewing Company brew.
Perfect.
Take a little edge off.
Well, you know, we were just texting back and forth literally a couple of minutes ago trying to plan when would be a good time for us to get together this week and do this. And Will's like,
none. Yeah, I said, first I said, well, never. Just fuck the podcast. I don't have time. And then I said, well, how about now? So thank you for being willing, sir. It's nice to see you.
I literally just pulled the computer out of my laptop bag. I pulled in about an hour and a half ago and threw everything on the bed, and I'm unpacking, and here we are, ready to talk.
Yep, absolutely. You had a pretty good trip or no?
Well, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times.
Okay.
We were on the emotional roller coaster this week. I tell you, it was a hard one.
You know what? I followed social media, so I know what you're talking about. Give us a brief synopsis there of what happened without... See, my wife has already told me that car trouble is boring. So
totally boring, like, but not when you're living it.
Not when you're living it. So give us a lowdown. What happened?
Well, the last time we talked, I think I told everybody on the podcast the engine light came on. Mm-hmm. Well, that engine light turned into your van is not driving back to Wisconsin. You got to figure this one the fuck out right now. So that was not fun. So it wasn't total dead man walking, but it would not have made it much further than out of the city. So we started looking for a van, which we've already established. There are no vans available, but we did find one here. We made an appointment to go look at it, and it sold before we could literally drive there.
This is during the show?
During the show, yeah.
So who's selling the artwork? Did you actually have, were you having a decent week? I mean, it's pretty distracting.
It was hard to keep our head in the game when we had this other issue going on.
Yeah.
You know, we would be doing the show, and we had a great show. I'm very happy with the show, but trying to deal with this other thing outside of it, trying to rush over to a dealership after each day and take a test drive when they're selling before we could even get there. Anyway, long story short, we ended up securing a vehicle. We found a new van, but it didn't have everything we needed. For one, it didn't have a trailer hitch. So we couldn't get home with the trailer.
So you just light it on fire, just collect the insurance when you get home to Wisconsin.
It's on the side of the road left somewhere. No, we were able to trade in the van, but then we had to schedule a trailer hitch thing, which we ended up sticking around for several days because we'd have an appointment to get the trailer hitch put on. We'd show up and they'd say, "Oh, sorry, man, it's the wrong part." And it just kept delaying the inevitable. But the other thing that made this quite a challenge was not only did the van break down on us, the trailer suspension had snapped and we were driving with our axle resting against the frame of the trailer. So that was another just crazy thing to deal with.
Oh, all right. So you bought yourself a new El Camino.
It was a Ford Transit.
Okay, all right.
We were able to find a Transit.
That's another thing my wife dropped. She's like, it's boring if he gets a white van. It's an interesting story if he buys like a El Camino.
There you go.
So, no, it super sucks. I was really feeling for you watching it kind of unfold while you were out there on the road. And I don't want to make light. That's a huge drag.
It was. But I mean, it's what we do. I mean, I've talked to so many people at the show who are like, well, let me tell you my story. And one of the ones that I heard was the worst is in this current environment of not being able to get a part to fix what we need. There was a story that Terry Cowsey told me. I can't remember who it was, but somebody ended up putting an entire new transmission into their vehicle because they were trapped on the road this year. They couldn't get a new vehicle. They couldn't get the replacement part for what they needed that would have just fixed the transmission. So it actually saved them time to just put in an entire transmission.
Wow. Yeah, services are hard to come by right now, and parts and whatnot. I had a blown axle support in on my trailer in Chicago, actually going to One of a Kind about 7 or 8 years ago, and seriously thought about pushing it into the river. I looked to see if I could unlock the gate, and I looked back. It was already backed up. I'm not kidding. Like I was like, this is like 7 or 8 years ago. There's not cameras everywhere. I'm like, I think I can roll this fucker into the river. So. I don't know. It's the crap that we deal with, and it's how we keep the wheels on the wagon, literally on a weekly, daily, monthly basis. It's tough.
Yeah. And I thought, just being in the van with the trailer hooked up and just heading east was the end of it. But then I had the next issue was making it through the mountains, and we're slowly climbing up and the snow starts to fall. And we weren't near the top. And I'm like, this isn't going to get better going up. But what do? You can't turn around. By the time I get to the top of the mountain, couldn't see the road. All the signs are blinking. Icy, icy, icy. Take it slow. Oh, I tell you, I'm so glad to be home. And I'm glad to be home for a while.
You find yourself,
that's all I have to say.
You were able to find yourself a Fairfield Inn and an Applebee's.
That was where I was at La Quinta. That damn Applebee's got so much business off of us. I don't care if people hate on me because we ate there. We were trapped. We had nowhere else to go. We had to eat at the Applebee's like 7 nights in a row.
Where's that show? You're in Palm Desert, California, and you've got like all these gourmet restaurants, and you're stuck in a parking lot with
It was pretty sad. I know. Well, we could have like Ubered everywhere we wanted to go, but that at the end of the day, it was like rest and get ready for the next one. It was stressful. It was a hard one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I've got I don't know. I say it's a hard one coming up with One of a Kind, but I do like setting up shop, and I always like going into that show and setting up for 4 days. They give you full day Wednesday to set it up. As long as you let the union guys do their job, they're happy, and they load all your stuff in, and you set it up, and they load it all out.
I remember that one. I remember they show up in those big flatbed carts up to your truck, and you just hand them this stuff, and it all gets pushed right up to your booth.
Yeah. Go park your stuff. I've got a great spot. It always ends up being kind of like holiday kickoff before the holidays. I've got a great neighborhood. Greg Turco is my next door neighbor, and he's a good buddy of mine, and Michael Schwegman's around the corner, so we're going to hang out.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a big time. I'm not, to be honest, super psyched about wearing a mask for 4 days. I might have to thatch my beard down a little bit in order to be comfortable for that amount of time.
Yeah. Is it a requirement of the show that everyone has to wear masks?
You have to be vaxxed and masked or show a negative test within the last week or 10 days, something like that, in order to get in. So that's Chicago, downtown Chicago. So I can't imagine that's going to cut down on attendance all that much.
Where do you stay there? Do you stay in town, or do you go like out in the suburbs?
In town. I'm going to stay right there at the show.
The one that has the Skyway, like where the Skyway attaches?
No, that one's closed. They did away with my favorite hotel, which is a huge bummer. I loved staying there. But anyway, I found $140 for the entire week for parking.
For the whole week?
In downtown Chicago on West Kenzie, right there next to the Mart. Wednesday through Monday, $140 solid. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So
that's not the one down by the chocolate factory, or is it?
Yeah, it is.
I got to the van after doing the show one night, parking there. Obviously, that was like 10 years ago, so it's probably a whole different scene down there. But somebody had actually punched out the keyhole of my van, and I didn't realize it because I had used the fob to get in. So I get in the van, and
So you found a big dump on the dashboard?
No, I didn't. That did not happen. But I
not that time.
My dad was there helping me, and I said, "Hey, Dad, grab the GPS out of the glove compartment." He opens up, and he goes, "It's not in here." I'm like, "It's right in there." It took me a good 5 minutes to realize someone had broken in and stole all the contents of our shit in the van. And then I had to figure out how to lock it up the next day. You can't just leave the van where someone could come in and drive it off. So that was a crazy scene down there.
Chicago can be a challenge, but you talk about that chocolate factory, and there is nothing like going to downtown Chicago right at the beginning of Christmas time, and the holidays are just kicking in and everything is decorated. And downtown Chicago's chocolate factory is kicking off this melted chocolate, beautiful smell. you're walking around in a city and you're like, what's that smell? It smells so good. And then you realize it's hobo vomit. And you're like, oh God.
Not in this case, though. But...
Right. No, this time you're like, you kind of like, you do a sniff and you're kind of like a little quick sniff. And you're like, yeah, is that a good one or is that a bad one? It's like, but it's a good one. It's legit good.
My first time doing the One of a Kind show, Oliver was in a stroller. That's how long ago I did it. And I remember my mom was going to babysit him in the hotel. She's such a huge Oprah fan. And so we're setting up and she reads our bio and she looked over at me and she said, Douglas, Oprah would like this. I'm like, Mom, Oprah's not going to be coming to this show.
No, Oprah's not coming to One of a Kind. One of a Kind is, I love that show, but you're never sure whether you're going to get salsa and porny potholders next to you or $10,000 paintings and sculptures. It's a mishmash.
It is. Everything's there.
You can say what you want about One of a Kind, and it has some great parts and some bad parts. It doesn't work for everybody, but Kathleen Hogan runs a tight ship, and I've always loved that show.
She has been there for a long time. She was there back when we did it. I remember that. So that's cool.
Yep.
That's good.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I hope you have great sales. I have so many memories of doing that show, and it always felt like it, like you said, you set up shop. It really takes a lot out of you. It's a long one, Actually, a funny story about that one. I was across from these folks at One of a Kind for what seemed like an eternity. And they had this line. Every time somebody walked up to their booth, they would greet them, but then they were talking about these whirly gigs that they made hanging up from the ceiling. And they go, they soothe your soul and make you smile. And I heard that the entire weekend. And I tell you, by the end of it, I was ready to just not be next to them.
Yeah, I remember doing Fort Myers one time, and there was this great little old guy next to me, but every single person that walked into his booth, he goes, hello. And I'm like, the first time I heard it, I'm like, it's kind of funny, but like, hello. It makes me insane. I hate it.
Yeah, by the end of it, you're like...
Yeah, it wasn't even the end of it. It was like 15 minutes later, and I'm like, I'm going to kill you. So, yeah. He was actually... It's an interesting story. That dude was one of the first digital artists that I've ever seen on the scene. Like, he was doing tablet painting. He was a little old guy, and he was doing tablet painting and printing them out, doing high-res stuff. And I mean, they were abstract and kind of, I don't know, it was interesting to see that before, I think he probably juried under mixed media at the time because there wasn't a digital category. But, interesting to see that.
Speaking of digital, we've been talking a lot at NAIA about the whole digital category thing. We've had some artists reach out who are in the digital category and kind of taken notice that the definition is getting a little like fast and loose, and we're starting to put a little attention towards that whole digital category.
Well, it's interesting. It seems to be the subject du jour. People in our industry a lot of times look for a loophole, and the loophole that they're finding in the digital category is, oh, well, if I scan my analog shit into the computer, it becomes digital, so might as well just jury under digital with my watercolors or my oils or my mixed media and call it digital. That way I can sell whatever sack full of art in a plastic bag that I want.
Isn't that technically called a reproduction, not a digital art category?
Well, every single piece of digital art is a reproduction, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Which is why they're finding that loophole.
Yeah, and it's getting some people then even heated. You have the old schoolers talking about, revisiting the whole topic of digital, saying, well, if there can't be an original made by hand, if it's made by a machine, then you start getting people real hot about, having opinions one way or the other of its validity as being a category.
I know printmakers, one in particular that particularly vocal about that. She doesn't want it as a category. I personally think the digital is a category. You can't shut it down. There's some beautiful digital artwork being made. My daughter is an artist. I mean, she's a kid. She's 11, but she's super talented, and she's sitting there on Procreate making really cool stuff.
Of course she is. Of course she is, coming from artist stock.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, she's driven too. It's not just a matter of kids having talent or whatever, but she really wants to create, and that's what she wants to do it on. She
Nice.
prefers that. But
What's the program you're talking about? Procreate.
it is something that you can draw and paint on your tablet or computer, and I've seen some of the top digital artists kind of using that one, but it's it's kind of like Photoshop.
Okay.
But it's even more in tune with the creatives as opposed to the eggheads. But anyway, the loophole is a short-sighted business model. If you're going to go out there and lie and try to cheat and game the system, then eventually your neighbors are going to get pissed off. I was at a couple of big shows this year and saw a lot of plastic bags walking by when I'm not allowed to have reproductions. It makes me mad. One of them in particular, I was set up next to a friend of theirs at Bayou. And I was like, hey, is this person, they're going, I guess it's pretty cool. They've discovered how to go digital. And he was laughing. He's like, they're not digital. They're completely analog. They're just scanning it in and printing it. And I'm like, well, wait till I broadcast that to the masses.
There you go. We've got our mouthpiece right here to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, it's, for me, in what I do, I feel a little bit out of touch on that whole 2D aspect of things, because every single thing I make, I have to put the glass blowing pipe into the furnace, gather out glass. Everything I touch is an original.
Yep.
And so I don't have the knowledge of other ways of creating. And I do think that the creation of a piece of art can be made using mechanical means of a mouse on a computer screen, just as well as if it's a pen at the end of our fingertips. You know what I'm saying? Creating an original piece of work and then digitally scanning it to get into that category is misrepresenting the intention of that category, in my opinion.
I don't know that it's just your opinion. I think that's just right.
Okay.
It's a really short-sighted business model.
Well, and this might be a good conversation for the show directors listening out there to kind of just take a look over their categories and make sure that they really are getting the legitimate ones in their shows, and know that this is something we're taking a closer look at.
Yep. What else we got on the docket? We're talking to Dylan Strzynski this week. We actually are recording the pre-interview this week because of my limited time. So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys talk about here in a couple of days. And I do know that he produced a film about the artist's life.
Yep.
Is that something you guys are going to talk about?
We'll get into that for sure. We'll talk about the film. We'll talk about music. It's going to be an interesting talk because I love Dylan and he's a good friend, but he and I hate talking shop. So it'll be interesting to actually see what we talk about because, I just kind of want to break the mold a little bit on this one and just run with talking to Dylan.
We don't really always just have to talk shop, because us artists, there's so much more to us and our lifestyles that make who we are. It isn't just about the creation of our work, what we're interested in, and it shapes us and what we want to make just as much as just where did you go to school and what influenced this body of work. I mean, I think it's important that we take those different conversations.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to talk to him because he and I have had conversations about how much we hate art shows. So let's see where this one goes. I don't know. I can't promise anything.
I found it kind of interesting that you and I both on our own, I had said, hey, I got to talk to Helen Gottlieb at a show. When we were comparing notes of who we'd like to talk to, we thought this would be a good 1-2 punch since Helen and Dylan are partners.
So you've got Helen on the docket after this?
I'm talking to her next week after Thanksgiving. So we saw each other out in California here. So we've got that lined up coming up next year too.
Nice. You got big plans for Thanksgiving?
We are going to do several Thanksgivings with all the little subgroups between lots of members of the family. But we'll go next door to my in-laws who are recovering from COVID. So we are talking about you wearing masks at One of a Kind. I keep feeling like this thing is over, right? This thing is over, huh? And then, my in-laws who are double vaccinated come down with COVID, and it has not been an easy road for them.
That's terrible. I'm going to try to get a boost on my way to One of a Kind. Just stop in one of those silly states where they don't actually want it and gobble up one of their shots. It's weird. Like we have a lot of cases of COVID, but a very high vaccination rate, but it's impossible to get the boost. My appointment in New Mexico, just in case I can't get it on the road, is in January. So,
oh, you're kidding.
No, I set up that appointment. It was like, would you like, the local pharmacy couldn't get me in until like February 22nd. And then the gigantic box behemoth that also gives shots was able to give me one in January.
Is it because they just lifted that anyone can get the booster now, and so they're just flooded?
New Mexico is filled with a lot of liberal people in the big cities, so I hate that it's politicized, but a lot of the more educated people tend to want to get the vaccination, and there tend to be a lot more educated people here. Morons don't want it. I've heard that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
sorry everybody. I told you I was in a shit mood. Hey, folks, another real quick thing. The NAIA has a survey that's going around. The survey that you fill out, it is only to help us to strengthen our voice and to give us one particular direction about what we do and don't like. Don't worry about splitting hairs about whether you think this question is worded right. Answer it as quickly and easily as you can, and give the best answer that you possibly can.
Yeah, just get through it. I mean, a lot of these questions may seem like, what's the point of that? But the engagement committee headed up by Court Anderson, and a lot of us have worked on this because these are questions coming directly from the shows. And they're saying, well, if you want to get, like, let's say this end result, these are some of the data points that we need to hit to give to our investors, to our stakeholders. So we would really like to see the responses to these surveys high, so we have enough data to provide them, so it actually would make a difference.
Right. Make your voice heard, folks. Answer that NAIA survey. You can find it on a bunch of the different Facebook groups. Art Fair Review, the NAIA Forum, Art Girls, I think, has it, all sorts of different places. So, and
if you're a show director, please share that to your artists as well, just to spread it even further if people aren't hitting these different groups.
Yep. You have until the 30th to fill it out, folks. So as this comes out, I think this might be your last day to fill it out. So do it today.
Remember last week we talked to Jay McDougall? We forgot a topic there, Will. We forgot a topic to talk to Jay about.
What's that?
The artisanal peg legs. We only talked about that the first half of the podcast, of the season of the podcast. And we forgot to bring up to Jay about his line of peg legs.
Did he have a series of pegs at La Quinta?
No, he did. He did ask me, though. He goes, I really wanted you to bring up the peg legs, and you never brought up the peg legs.
Yeah, you should have talked to Jay about the peg legs. I'm a little disappointed that he hasn't paired with a leather worker in order to have those available, but luckily I do not need one yet. So
I dropped the ball on that one, but I sure am grateful to everyone throughout this whole course of this podcast. It's been, it's Thanksgiving week. I had a lot of time in the van just thinking about what we've worked on this year, and I've just been so thankful to everybody who we've talked to, who've shared their stories, and we're like learning from each other. And this has been really a fun project.
It has been absolutely giving thanks to those guys and creating those kind of bonds a little bit deeper. Keena Crow, who you interviewed, I think, second or third time out, said some really kind words to us about the podcast, and special thanks go to her for mentioning that. It those kind words keep us going, and I appreciate her honesty and learning a little bit more about her from, costumes at pornos and everything else. So
and just thinking about the different stages of what we've gone through this year. When we started this, we weren't even leaving the house. We were still we didn't have a vaccine yet. And, I had kind of in La Quinta, I had some conversations with people saying, just wondering, taking people's temperature, saying, is this still interesting? Because at first the podcast was really all about having that connection with people because we were stuck. We were at home. We didn't see each other. And I did get the feedback that people are saying, even though they are seeing each other, these are the deep dives into each other's stories that we may know them peripherally. We might know their work down the road from us or in another booth. But here we get to really know more about it. So that kind of gave me some renewed energy coming back, after this long trip away from home and thinking about 3 months at home before I go off to the next show and just thinking about, moving forward with this project.
You have energy because you don't have a show. You texted me and were like, when's a good time to talk about the podcast? I'm like, now's a good time for you to shove this podcast So
I could feel you. I feel you. I know, man. I know.
I'm kind of in the midst of the same deal of like getting ready for that big September, but I have high hopes for One of a Kind and Armadillo, my last 2 of the year. So we'll see how it goes.
You're going to kill it. You're going to do great. You've got some great work, and I'm really excited for you. So
terrible work.
You don't have terrible. Oh, I reached you at your self-loathing point, I see.
It is. I just finished the meeting. So like, this sucks, and I suck for making it. That's where I'm at right now.
Well, there is a job opening at Home Depot if you want it.
No, Applebee's. I'm getting a corporate sponsorship. Hey, let's get right into the interview. We have no idea what I'm getting ready to say to Dylan Strzynski, but I'm excited to talk to my old friend there from the art show Road Warrior Circuit. So let's get right into it, Douglas.
Let's do it. Here's Dylan Strzynski.
I'll clear it up when I talk to him.
I've been cracking open one of your beers over here. So here's Dylan.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap, the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
Well, I've been getting notices from shows this week that I need to jump on and pay for my booth, but I'm not at home at my desk. So I really enjoy that I'm able just to flip open my phone.
Flip open your phone? Do you have a flip phone, Doug? And does Zap work on your flip phone? Because that's impressive.
No, but I turn on my phone, I log into Zap, and I'm able to buy my booth right there on the spot, and I can make sure I get that double booth or that corner booth I'm looking for, and I don't get stuck somewhere I don't want to be.
Quit talking about double booths, because if those shits are sold out by the time I come to get to them, I'm going to be mad.
Well, I sure do appreciate that with Zap we're able to keep up on our business with the shows on the road using our mobile device. Today's episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is the first of a 3-part series where we dig deep into a dynamic art show partnership. Dylan Strzynski and Helen Gottlieb are from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dylan is a mixed media artist and Helen a printmaker. Today, Will sits down with Dylan and we get to hear about his process. Welcome to the show.
Oh, all right.
Dylan, welcome to the podcast. It's nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you basically because I'm in a spot during the podcast where I'm like, I'm tired. I don't want to talk about art shows. Like, you and I, when we get together, I don't know that we've ever actually sat down and talked shop. We don't talk business. We're talking movies and music. And
Right. Well, because art shows are interesting only up to a point, and then it's just the kind of nuts and bolts of everyone's life, and it's not always that interesting. But
it gets repetitive. It's like, you went to school and then somebody showed you how to do an art show?
Yeah. I went to school and I wish someone showed me how to do an art show. That's part of the problem.
Well, how did you, I mean, I am going to ask you that. How did you jump into doing this?
Well, I don't really have a very interesting origin to it. I don't think. I don't know. You know how you talk to some people and they have these amazing backstories and they did all this great stuff in their career.
Sure.
And yeah, I'm not one of those at all.
like with Cliff, I like when he was talking about, like, he went down to an art show and he was like, I can do better than this shit.
Sure.
Like looking around like, well, I can do this.
Well, because I always knew what an art fair was.
Right.
It's not like, oh, an art fair. I mean, I'd gone to art shows, with my parents, little art fairs, and they'd always buy like some pottery or something. So I knew that art shows existed, but they didn't really, they didn't have much appeal to me as a young person for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I didn't really see art shows reflecting, what my kind of artistic interest was.
Well, and, do they now even?
Somewhat, they do to a degree, but even that is it's almost like I've just developed an appreciation for a lot of things that I probably didn't have when I was younger.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
But because I went to the University of Michigan, you have the art fair there. And with that, it just brings this big stigma. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, explain it. Like how so?
It has to do with a very, very old school kind of academic fine arts education,
right?
That I got.
Yeah, they all kind of look down on
they looked really down on it in our school because we had the big show right there.
Yeah, Ann Arbor.
No real artist would sell their artwork in a tent on the street and all this, and then the local thing. It's not art and it's not fair and it's blah, 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 and all that. And
right.
I don't know. It kind of seemed like it might be fun because it is long enough ago that the Ann Arbor Art Fair was a little bit of a freak show. I don't know how many people really can remember that anymore, but it used to be a really far out event. But I went to college. I ended up getting a fine art degree, even though I think I tried to avoid it for a few years.
Just to kind of avoid your kind of natural skill set, or
yeah, I think that's what it was. Well, I'm also really a contrarian, obstinate, anti-authoritarian personality, and if whatever you expect, I'm going to do. Especially when I was a young person, I'm not going to do it. Don't bother telling me what to do because I'm just going to be a horrible person to deal with.
Which makes you perfect for. I don't know, doing this line of work because I find myself completely, I've had jobs, I've had pretty good jobs, art director stuff and magazines and things. Mm-hmm. I'm completely unhireable now. Like I had that tendency, but now my fuck you meter is spiking in the red, like all the time. So you kind of, did you ever have jobs like that? Did you ever?
I was always a pretty good employee, oddly, at most jobs I had as a very, very young person going way back.
It's that Midwest work ethic.
Yeah, it is. I had 2 paper routes as a kid for 7 years. I was the longest running paper boy.
That's amazing.
I did.
I did my fair share. I slung papers for sure.
I did that. And then right around the holidays of my last year of high school, I got a job at this guitar store, and I proceeded to then work at that job for almost 4 years while I went to community college before I transferred to the University of Michigan.
Was that just backing your music habit? I wanted to get into music.
Yeah, that was all part of that, Well, here's the thing. This is I was having a conversation about this with my best friend from growing up recently, who is also an art guy. He has an MFA, and he's a filmmaker and a director and writer and educator and all that. And he was commenting on the arts education as looking back and kind of always having this feeling that like it was somehow remedial. I don't know if you. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. But like the way the art itself was, or like
just as a like an educational path,
right?
You know what I mean?
I do.
And so maybe I kind of had that in the back of my mind, but it was always my natural thing. I really liked just really drawing. Really was my basic thing.
Yeah.
Like I still don't call myself a painter, even though I often make things with paint. But that's a technical thing.
Is that more just how you consider yourself, though?
That's just how I consider myself. But it goes back to this really specific kind of old school fine art education that I ended up getting at the University of Michigan, where I ended up. And I majored in printmaking and sculpture. I don't think many people have double fine art degrees, but I do. And anybody that knows me probably shouldn't be surprised because I kind of do so many things.
Yeah.
But it was one of these things where I got to the end of college, and I went to college so long. Like I should have a master's degree, but and by the end, it's like they couldn't not give it to me because I had done so much of each subject.
Right.
You know, I was introduced to printmaking at my community college, my second semester of college at all. So I was a very young person. I was probably never a terribly I think there was probably nothing very auspicious about me as a art student. I don't think I was pretty average.
Well, that's interesting to hear because the way you kind of are on like the art show circuit, you definitely have a certain aesthetic, and I'd say, and kind of like the way that I think of you is like just a certain integrity to it and a refusal to change or to sacrifice that integrity.
Well, I think it comes with whatever my personality disorder is and my education, which however often I will talk about it and kind of, I'll be very critical of it because I don't know if it was the best version of an arts education for me in retrospect, which means you can't say stuff like that, but
everything kind of gets you to where you are, but I know what you mean. I went to going through an illustration department and instead of fine art, it kind of the school kind of caters to the top guy, and the top guy was a painter, and I just wanted to do he was an amazing, he wanted to do medical textbook stuff, and that's what he's gone on to do. But I'm over in the corner drawing pen and ink cartoons, and it's like, I don't really want to, don't talk to me. I just want to do my shit. But so I don't think it was the best for me either. But at the same time, it got me to where I am anyway. It's a weird road, circuitous route, but still get you there.
It is a weird road, circuitous route. But interestingly, actually, Helen was studying scientific illustration until I actually introduced her to printmaking.
Oh, man. So you guys met in school?
Yeah, we met at school. And she, I think she just kind of dropped that and maybe had one more class to go before she could have majored in it.
Right.
And then she got into printmaking. And, but anyway, so I went to U of M, and it's an environment which at that time still, the fine art people, the professors there were really coming from that ABEX background.
Yeah.
They've all retired since I graduated now in the last 20 years, but they were the kind of old guard students of all of these old abstract expressionist artists who had all these really high-minded, highbrow attitudes about painting, and it's all very de-skilled and super snotty and as far from any kind of commercial art or commercial potential, or all of that just doesn't exist.
Right.
But from that, you do pick up and you do gain an understanding of really what art is.
Sure. The larger scale, larger scope,
right.
Focus, I guess, of art.
But here's the thing that was weird about it for me is that when I started going to college, even when I started going to when I transferred to U of M, I didn't know very much about contemporary art, very, very little. And I had, grown up kind of looking at, basically abstract expressionist art and pop art, which my father was really into.
Okay. Was he, were your folks into art? Were they artists too, or just what they liked to look at?
No, my parents are kind of interesting because my dad, he actually has a master's degree in aquatic biology.
Wow.
So, I kind of grew up in the science household, even though I really was not, I didn't really have the patience to sit there and really excel at that stuff.
Right.
As I just did. I mean, I definitely think I'm smart enough and I like science and stuff. But as a child, I just couldn't do it. It was really hard to hold my attention. It took all of my power to get through and just be a decent student. I didn't want
Right.
to, you know what I mean? It's really hard.
Totally
Like
know you. I had pinhole camera vision on stuff I liked,
God.
you know, and it was like, here's what I like, and then the stuff that I
Right.
didn't. It's like, look, you're getting A's and D's. Like,
Yeah.
could you kind of, you know, middle of the road would be great.
Right.
But,
But like I also couldn't like finish like a project and see it through until I was like in my 20s. Like I was just too wound up and spazzy and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing I
drugged
could
you nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't like a trouble kid. I just didn't want to do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's the only way I can describe it. And then, but I got into like playing music and all of that. And that was the one thing where I could really just kind of zone out on for days and days.
Nice.
And that kind of, you know, and I have some other theories about what that does in our life, but you know, so anyway, but I had my natural drawing abilities and all that. And I go to college and I enter this really highbrow art environment that is strange to me because the kind of art I was interested in was illustration. You know, I knew about comic book artists. I knew about illustrators, you know.
Yeah.
I love comic art. It's really the roots of me as an artist, I think.
I think so too. I mean, you bring a certain sense of humor to fine art.
Right. And I also was really into like filmmaking, you know.
Yeah.
And I had all those books about like the making of Star Wars and I had like the Dick Smith monster makeup book, and I had the Tom Savini, you know, gory horror movie makeup book and all that stuff. And so I understood that the people who made that did that stuff were artists.
Right.
I love looking at like concept art for,
oh my God, yeah,
for movies and
I was
all
a big
that. And I,
Fangoria guy.
yeah, totally. Me too. That was what artwork was to me.
Right.
And then I entered this kind of highbrow, abstract, expressionist, intellectual art world. And all of that is just like, get this out of here. What is this? You know,
right.
This is
all
not
the things
art.
You like suck.
All the things I like suck. I remember one day I was in a class. I had a Juxtapose magazine because that was out by then.
Yeah.
I was looking at this spread of like Robert Williams paintings, which are those things are amazing.
Yeah.
They're just, I can't, you know, and I'm like, wow, this is great. And this teacher's like, get this out. This is shit. What is this? And it like, this isn't painting, this, you know, and all this, you know, and even though I kind of resented that attitude,
yeah,
I still picked up those values. And
so the values of your professor that thought the stuff that you liked was terrible. But that's still kind of the stuff you wanted to do.
It's still kind of the stuff that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I like all of that, but I'm also becoming more interested in this kind of fine art with a capital F world.
More fine art and less ratfink.
More fine art and less ratfink. And for a long time, I couldn't, it's like I couldn't reckon the two things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it takes a while.
It's like I'd become a kind of like fascist intellectual about art.
Yeah.
And that really, I think it became a handicap that I carried way past college for a long, long, long time. And it made it very, very hard for me to get comfortable with the kinds of things that I'm interested in. And it made
the
it
kind
difficult.
of things you're interested in, and then also kind of the venue venue where you're selling too. I mean, that's got to be a hard place to, you know, not to, we're just a warning to the listener. We're probably going to take a big dump on art shows later in the conversation. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you.
Oh God.
You know, I mean, it does make it difficult when you have that kind of aesthetic selling in the venue where you're selling, because a lot of the times that doesn't exist in, you know, or maybe it exists, but it exists in every, you know, 20th booth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think 20th would probably be
it's really kind.
Yeah, it'd be really kind. Yeah, but I mean, and everything I'm saying is kind of pointless now because there are so many examples of artists who are drawing from all of these areas. But I just, it's like I was just fully into the art school thing and into getting into that philosophy and like, and all of that. And it took me a long, long time to really get out of it. And I didn't even know that my school had like an illustration class.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like I didn't know if somebody would have said, hey, you know what? I bet you should maybe get on this track. And no one ever did. Huh. But it was kind of weird because like I really didn't like the commercial art stuff. I didn't like graphic design, you know, and I took one semester of like an industrial design class and I was like, this is a drag. I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Super,
you know, it's like
super anal.
Yeah, super anal. It's like I'd rather do the fine art thing and then go, you know, take some interesting academic elective classes on something that I would prefer to learn about.
Yeah.
You know, but that's the other thing. When you're at an institution, like when you're at like the number one public institution, your attention is really divided.
Right.
You know, you're not just at art school all the time.
But I mean, that's the idea too. You take those intellectual classes, you take the classes that aren't necessarily part of your major, and then you never know what you're going to draw from later on.
Totally.
What's going to spark your brain.
Sure. You know, and I'd done so much college before I went there. You know, I'd had like science and all of this stuff, and I had my algebra classes that I had to try really hard to get a D in and all of that. And, you know, but anyway, back to you're talking about my parents. Yeah. So this is really important. So even though my father was a biologist, he never actually worked in that field. And what my dad ended up doing is he became a sign painter.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's one of those guys that, you know, was a part of that secret brotherhood of hand lettering sign painting guys. Yeah.
That's incredible. Talk about anal retentive and those kind of. You think that has something to do with your dislike of graphic design when you were in school? Yeah,
oh, it absolutely does. Yeah. Because now everybody is back to appreciating that stuff and thinks it's really cool. But, you know, my father worked really, really hard. You know, both of my parents did. And he built this business, you know, really all through the 80s. And like, we were not affluent at all. Should say that. Sure. You know, my dad he worked for like a cleaning company, and he would like be out like waxing the floor at 7-Eleven all night.
Yeah.
And then during the day he'd be painting signs and building that business. And that really characterized like an entire decade. Like that was the 80s. Like he started that when we moved to northern Michigan. And
I mean, the hustle though, to keep the wheels on and do all of those things.
Yeah. So I just saw somebody who was working really, really hard all the time, you know? And then there was that, you know, the early impact of, you know, like digital technology and that kind of thing was when the vinyl sign lettering machines, the plotters came out, which are ubiquitous now. Most people think that's what a sign is, but for a long time it wasn't like that. And that started to really get its tentacles into his industry.
Yeah.
And made it really hard for him to keep up just doing everything by hand. And people weren't appreciating the craft side of that.
Of course.
You know, they just wanted, like everything in this country, they just wanted to get something for cheap. And eventually, and this is really just about 30 years ago, I think he had to do this. He, you know, had to like buy a vinyl plotting machine and like finance that and start having that as an option in his business. And so I saw like the craft side of it wasn't really appreciated, and this kind of lame technology was taken over, and the whole thing just looked like really tough way to make a living.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciated the craft of what he did. And I can't tell you for the life of me why I never learned how to do it. Probably because I was just too young and impatient during the years when I would have been around to do it.
Well, that's what we resist too. Right?
I know, exactly. So I did have that in my background. You know, I knew that there were ways to do art as a living. I think maybe his example was a little bit too blue collar for, even though that we're all working, like we work our asses off. I don't think people realize it. It just kind of all added up to a strange kind of outlook and attitude about artwork. And my mother had come from the theater.
Wow.
And then
was she still acting, or did she?
No, she wasn't. She wasn't an actor. She actually did technical direction in theater, and then she
loved that aspect of it. I did theater. Growing up in high school.
Yeah,
on a little bit.
I think I probably would have done that if I'd grown up in a different community. I didn't really grow up in a very very accepting place, I guess.
Sure. Michigan, not so welcoming in the arts, maybe.
Oh no, definitely down here for sure, but not so much up in northern Michigan. It was a weird place. So I get out of college, got to the end of school, and then I made, I'd ended up making this tiny little body of work that I thought was good.
Yeah.
The small little group of prints and some metal sculptures. And I had no idea what I was going to do when I graduated.
They never teach you how to sell it.
They never teach you how to sell it. Yeah. I didn't have the commercial background. I was kind of burned out on school. I felt like I'd reached this point of maturity pretty late. So I didn't leave undergrad with like a super great portfolio. I had a few really nice things that I still am proud of, but not, nothing that demonstrated, somebody who had a really great, thoroughly conceived artistic identity that they were going to walk into some MFA program and really be amazing. And I didn't really want to do that just then yet. And I look at my bank account and I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to graduate and I have enough money to live for precisely 2 weeks. And I just started working on jobs, and just jobs, just service industry jobs and jobs and just grinding it out and sort of, I briefly for a while subscribed to that idea that like, I'll make artwork in my spare time while I do these jobs, which it does not work.
No,
it never does. It's not possible. You won't do anything.
Yeah.
You have to set yourself up to do something else. So all I did for a few years really was just doodle in sketchbooks and kind of get frustrated with things. But shortly after that, Helen graduated from college.
Is she a little bit younger than you? So she's
actually 5 years younger than me.
Okay. So thank God you were in school for a really long time, or you wouldn't have met her, right?
Well, it's also, true. And she also started college early.
Okay.
She's one of those people that
she's
just
a smarty pants.
She couldn't wait to get out of her parents' house. And so she, went to community college in high school and then started college when she was 17.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And then we got together later than that, but then she was finishing college and, we knew about the Ann Arbor Art Fair, despite all the stigmatizing and stuff that we had been brought up with. We just said, hey, wouldn't it be kind of fun to go to art shows for one summer and just like travel around?
Yeah. Did you have anybody that talked to you guys about that, or did you just jump right in?
No, this is the thing. We had nobody, like nobody. Helen had a little bit of contact with that world growing up because she would go to like the Ann Arbor Artisans Market when she was a teenager and like sell little things that she made, with candles and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then
jumped on before it was stigmatized.
Yeah, kind of, but her and her sister would give hair wraps during the Ann Arbor Art Fair.
I would kill to see that.
Yeah, when they were teenagers,
running across little Helen doing hair wraps.
Yep, she and her they did that. They were still doing that. When I graduated from college.
That's amazing.
It was because it was just one of their annual hustles that they would do, and they did all kinds of things. But we thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to, go apply to some art shows and drive around the country? And we didn't have I didn't, and I really don't think she did yet then, even though I suspect she may try to sell it a little differently.
Yeah.
We didn't really have a sense of the art show circuit as a thing where you could make very much money, let alone have that be a full-time job career. We did not understand that. And we didn't have anybody who did that, who could explain it to us, despite our proximity to such a significant show.
Yeah. Just a huge number of people just sitting over on the street, just waiting to tell you what to do, right?
And when you're walking out of school, it's not like it's not saying it never happens. You do once in a while encounter people who are really, very, very industrious and focused on that. Someone like Schwegman,
right?
Which is what is so amazing to me about him, that he had that foresight and that maturity, and he had somebody who was there kind of to mentor him in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That's worth so much.
It really is. I can't believe there are so few of us that have had that,
I know.
Mentor. Like, you would think that would be part of the academic process, but so often they just the academic process just shuts off the actual part where you learn how to do what you do and then sell it, go out. And I remember, my ex was, doing art shows during a time like she had this class on Friday that was supposed to teach people how to sell their artwork, and they docked her from going in because she had to leave and actually go and sell her artwork. And she was like, look, I can trade off back and forth and teach the class how I'm doing this. I'm like, oh, you're doing art shows? No. Yeah, that is and they just docked her grade instead of the irony never escapes me on that one. Just like, fuck you for selling your work. You get an F. That's
really, really funny. But it's like if you're on the fine art track at school, you're supposed to just, get an MFA, do the full academic track, and then get into some, if you're lucky, some thankless grind where you're doing juggling adjunct positions all over your region,
right? Or continue the track of teaching other people how to not sell their artwork.
Exactly right. And then there's I can't really speak for how it works in the graphic design world, but most of the people I know, or many of them I know who were on that track, had a little bit more of a direct path. But
they taught us how to do. You're in the illustration department. Your only friend is going to be the UPS man. You're going to do your drawing and send it off.
And it's like somebody should have explained to me how to be an illustrator. Like I would have done that.
Yeah. It's a tough road too, though.
It's for sure. It really is.
Having that, especially my personality, having that kind of introvert extrovert, I love the extrovert part where I get out on the road and I'm selling the stuff, but then I get to the end of the show and I'm like, God, I want these people to stop looking at me so I can go home and just make stuff again.
Oh God, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, so we did this one summer. And you don't get very far when you start out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if we left our state at all. I don't think we did. Our first art show was the Greektown art show in Detroit, which I don't even know if that goes on anymore.
Yeah.
This was back in, this would have been 2003.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when people used to go to Detroit, they would go to Greektown. That was like the one little safe couple of blocks in downtown Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now no one goes to Greektown because there's too much cool stuff going on. So no one, no one goes there anymore.
Yeah.
No one goes there. That's funny. And the thing that we did, we showed our artwork together in a booth.
Same booth? Were you working on a collective body, or you had your stuff and she had hers?
We just had artwork. We had print editions of prints that we'd made in school. Yeah. And we would just set them up there on the wall and sell them. you know, she generally outsold me by a substantial margin, but
that's, that jumps ahead too. I was going to ask you about that kind of dynamic with you guys and creating separate bodies. And I mean, is there any in-house competition, or do you just?
No, not really. I mean, I think for a long time I was always just really frustrated because I was like, why can't I want to make as much money as you do doing this. And sometimes I would,
sure.
But she just had, for her personally, I think she was more rewarded consistently at the beginning. So it allowed her to get a kind of a firmer grip on what she was doing and how she should do it. And at this point in time, I wasn't even convinced we would, I thought maybe we'll just do this for a summer. We'll see what happens. I don't know. No one has explained anything to us. No one even talks to you when you are people in your early 20s and you show up on the art fair scene and you don't, and you don't know what you're doing, and there's nobody else around, like we didn't have friends in the art fair circuit for years because we were just kind of weird little outsiders.
Yeah.
But
plus you're young, you're together too. Yep. I don't know if you ran into this, but like, I don't know, Susan, my wife, and like she and I get together and we're still technically newlyweds. And so we kind of run into this thing where we're like, well, we're just centered on each other and it's harder to make any kind of friends. And it's just, I don't know. It definitely breeds kind of codependency. You create your own little world.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I do think that happens. We did it anyway. So we did a few shows. I remember there's an art fair in Flint up at the Flint Art Institute, which does exist and is actually a pretty nice little place to check out if anyone's ever feels like they want to go to Flint. It's where I came from.
Get yourself it's a big old glass of water.
Yeah, big old glass of water. And we got like an award there. They gave us like $25. Nice. And we're like, oh my gosh, we won $25. And we like went out and ate some hamburgers or something, and I don't remember if that year, if we went to Arts, Beats and Eats yet.
Okay.
Or if we didn't do that until the next year, but we did that for a few years before we started going out west for Labor Day, which didn't start until I think the first time we did that was 2005, which is pretty quick now when I think about it. Yeah. And we actually had an art gallery that year over on the west side of Michigan in this town called Saugatuck.
You guys opened up your own space?
We did. We had our own little space there. And Helen applied to that show, the Sausalito show, and got in. And she ended up driving out there with a friend while I stayed back and
home just doing the gallery thing.
Open up the gallery every day, and I just would hang out in there and make artwork, and we'd sell stuff. And during that time, it was kind of weird because I'd sort of reached this point where it's like, man, I don't really know, like, what's my subject? What am I going to do? I don't have printmaking resources. I'd been doing metal sculpture. I didn't have a place where I could go work on that stuff. And I would just like sit in a room in the house where I lived. And I just was like, well, I got to just get to work. And I just started painting on stuff. I just started painting and sticking things together with cardboard and just making these really kind of raw mixed media compositions, and I started selling them.
Cool.
I was like, oh,
at the gallery, or this is
at the gallery. Yeah. It all kind of led into that, and then that ended up being a springboard the next year doing shows.
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you.
I mean, did that feel like it kind of, you found your spot there, or you found your body of work with that?
I don't know that I found a body of work, but I found a way of working and just like the habit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I made a body of work, and actually some of the stuff that I started doing around that time have carried way through almost into the present,
Yeah.
Like some of the landscapes that I've kind of intentionally stopped making them the last few years, but where they're like really flat and like it's like a hillside with scrape marks, and then the little crude drawn little little trailers and stuff.
Right.
You know,
that
started around that time.
Okay, cool. And then was that kind of you started out kind of doing landscapes, and lately you've kind of been pulling it in, going more suburban, a little bit, playing with that kind of suburban feel, and instead of the houses, or still some of the houses, but like the fences. And
it's just an evolution of that subject and that way of representing it. And I'm really motivated by material, and that's why a lot of that stuff is like, the piece of mine that you got is a really good example. I think probably one of the best out of the stuff I'd done over the course of the last year or so.
Yeah, I love that piece. And do you always have, I noticed it later, but you took a little Iggy Pop reference to it, and you're always tied in with you don't always tie it in with music, but.
I don't. I'm really interested in language. Mm-hmm. The way that you can create an image and it looks like one thing or it means one thing to you. And then as soon as you attach words to it, it's forever locked into that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's less open to interpretation, really.
Yeah. It's less open to interpretation, even though people are still going to interpret it. You haven't made it that rigid, right. But I like that process, so I like to include language in the things I make. And a lot of times people call them titles, and I used to call them titles, and then I kind of stopped and I started calling them captions.
Nice.
And they became more like very strange single panel kind of comic, like cartoon images to me, even though some of it is so like fine art, you would never confuse it in a million years with something that was derived.
Yeah, but I see it that way too. But it also is a way, kind of, you'll see the imagery, and then the caption will take you out of that, what you thought it was, and then make you think and pull you off in another direction. It's like, well, it's not a dog in a yard, It's like, oh, is this the coyote and he's patrolling the yard? Is this what's happening, or is he inside? So that's why I engaged with it. But
and he's a neighborhood threat because he might eat your cat.
Right.
So that's why it's called that,
Yeah.
So I'm really, really motivated by that. And I like to have things that are there for me to respond to. Otherwise I get really bored and I start feeling like I'm just doing work and repeating something all the time. It's really the engine of me just getting anything done at all.
Yeah.
And so I try to create this system and create an environment for myself where I have a lot of things laying around, not now, because I didn't always do it this way, but I try to have a lot of stuff laying around that I can start playing around with, start cutting it up, start covering it with paint. Maybe I draw on it, blah, blah, blah. And I just make things happen, because I've never been, and I struggle with it so much. I've never been like a production type artist where like the stuff you do, I can't believe how many of those things you draw, you paint. I'm like, are you able to keep doing this?
Well,
all the time.
It's funny because like I do things again, and the way that I get around it, like I'll change it up a little bit, and I'll change it until I'm like, okay, well, this one, I have this interior bar piece that I've done again and again, and I've changed it a little bit till the point where I've almost found what the actual meaning of it is to me and the composition, and now I think I'm done. So I don't know how much, I don't know that I can do that again.
Oh, again. Right. Yeah.
So I get it. I do appreciate that. My previous body of work was so production oriented, and I hated it, and I swore I'd never do it again. And then I started telling these other stories with my work. And then I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'm not done with that story. Maybe I want to go back and tell the rest of it, or tell it again, or tell something else about it, or in a different way. But I do see what you're doing has its own merit, but it can also be exhausting just because your brain gets tired of thinking of.
Exactly. I was having a brief conversation about that. Well, I guess the week before last now, we went out to that La Quinta show, which there should be no art fairs in November. I just want to say that.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, because driving across the country in November, and we had great weather, just lucked out, except it was very windy because it's, you know, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald season.
Yeah.
But it gets dark. And then when you drive east, it just is always dark. It just gets darker and darker. The whole drive.
I'm doing that, the one in Austin, they're doing an outdoor version, weekend version of the Armadillo. So it's a low commitment, 3-day way to test that market for me. So I'm going and trying that. And I'm like, God, it goes till 5:30. And it is further south than I am, but I'm like, it still gets dark at 5. It goes till 5:30.
Yep. But anyway, it's crazy when you're in California.
Yeah.
It's dark at like 4:30.
Jesus.
It's crazy.
So you guys were out there. You're having a conversation with.
We're out there, and I was talking to the nicest man on earth. Daryl Thetford.
Yeah.
And he was asking me what I was doing. Like, would you come out and do this show? Because I was just there with Helen, helping out, and which is an understatement because I'm totally like I'm half of my job is working on her stuff.
Of course.
And I was like, nah, I don't think so. I don't really see this as my market. And I was saying, I was thinking about maybe changing some stuff I've been doing or whatever. And I said, I didn't expect him to be surprised because I was thinking I may not. This is a part of a bigger conversation. I may not do very many shows this coming year.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't do that many this past year. And I said, I said to Daryl, I was like, it's the novelty is exhausting, and when I start to feel like I'm not being very rewarded by the shows where I used to just kind of grasp at straws and try to contrive something.
Right.
Now I don't have as much motivation to do that. And I'm just like, I just think I maybe just want to lay back a little bit and kind of reinvent what I'm doing,
Well, I mean, when you're always saying something and you're not repeating what you're doing and you're always trying to have a fresh voice, I can see it's exhausting.
It is exhausting.
You don't have necessarily, when I go into your booth, I don't necessarily see the thing that you can kind of lean into when you're tired.
Right. Yeah.
You've called it Art Fair Gold before, but we can talk about Art Fair Gold, and I do want to talk about that maybe after your La Quinta, but taking kind of a break, like you don't have that. I don't know, when you're like, each painting is brand new every single time. You don't have a production body of work at all ever. There's no element of it. What do you lean on? And I can see you needing to take a break.
Well, the thing for a long time, it was always those flat, scrapey landscapes, which I've made so many of, and I don't even know if people remember, but I've gone through, like 15 years ago, I had like the proto versions of that stuff, and that was a whole big long body of work that went on, and then I got to the end of it, and I just want to make it anymore, and but that was kind of my thing I could lean into. And I would always do it in such a way where it was always a new version of that, kind of that motif. Yeah. And then I just got to the point where I developed it as far as I could, or I felt that way anyway. And then they start to not be as good. And then I start kind of seeing there people don't like them as much because they know, or maybe it's just me.
Smell that energy off of them.
Yeah, I guess. And then I really want to, by spending too much time on this, I'm kind of depriving myself of working on new things.
Yeah.
I know you were talking about that with that conversation with Signy.
Right.
And
that's what commission did, commission work depriving the next thing that you're going to make, and sometimes that production or I can't go to a show without this image,
But here's the thing that is different for me than the vast majority of artists who do shows. There are a few exceptions, and I will point them out, but because we didn't start doing this, we hadn't contrived the thing that we were going to sell.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
It just developed. And to me, I just used it rather than a way to, and this sounds ridiculous as I say it, rather than as a business or a way to make a living, I used it as a way to be an artist. And that's a little bit of a different way to enter art shows. And on top of that, you have nobody. I mean, I didn't know any better. And I thought that's what everybody was doing, because that's what you have. You have access to this venue that doesn't require anything. You don't have to have some great resume or graduated from Yale or anything like that. You can just be an artist.
Yeah.
You know,
you can be completely self-taught. You don't have to.
Yeah. Every kind of person is out there on the street doing that. And since I began from that position, it never seemed strange to me that I would do a body of work. It looks like this year. And then when you see me next year, it's going to have mutated into the next thing.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I also, in more recent years, I've become more cautious about making sure I allow myself the wiggle room, because sometimes it's almost like I get worse at it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's been times in the past where I had far, I don't know, I guess cohesion or a lot of unity in the work that I was showing. Although I will say that this summer at the shows I went to, like when I was at Cherry Creek and all that, that was my favorite, my best looking art show booth I thought I'd ever had.
Is it because you had more time to create it?
Well, yeah, I did have a little more time. But like most people, I didn't really take advantage of it.
I definitely didn't. Yeah.
No, but I was in this position where I was, like the previous year, I had made some things. And I was just starting to kind of dig in fully on the kind of the more assemblage leaning things. I mean, I don't call them collages because they're not collages. It's all assembled from things that I make. You know, it's all my own materials.
Right. Are you talking about your 2D work?
My 2D work. Yeah. Not sculptures. That's another thing. But I just was able to get it together and really, really get it on track and focus it with the time that I did work during the kind of the lockdown period.
I mean, it was a really cohesive body of work.
I thought it was. There was only a couple of them to me that I would have left out. Yeah. But then I was like, well, I'm going to leave them because people are going to like them. So they're going to stay in the booth.
Well, that's funny to me too, because I came over and we had decided to pick something up from you. Right. And we'd been by there several times. And then I'm like, well, shit, we better get it or it's going to be gone, because it was a great show. But there was one piece that I was kind of looking at, and it's like an immediate, it's a laugh, and you were like, nah, you don't want that. That's just art fair shit. And it cracked me up, but it brought it, and that'll be a good segue into Art Fair Gold, because we've talked about that. Right. What is Art Fair Gold to you?
Art Fair Gold is this thing that is completely non-confrontational, doesn't demand very much of the audience, references often something that they're already familiar with, so it's been validated by the greater culture. And it's just this thing that's going to sell really well. It's just like a really great art show product. And I should say this before we continue, I don't hold any of this against anyone.
It's all part of the hustle.
It's all part of the hustle. Everyone's got to make a living somehow. And when I hear about people who do fantastically well at shows, I'm actually usually impressed.
Definitely.
And I often feel that, well, maybe I don't really have a personal interest so much in what that person makes, but there's something to learn from them.
Definitely. And there's always, it seems like once you get to a certain level, and then you get, if you're lucky enough to get to the next level, then you're always meeting these next people that are a little bit, you're like, well, you hear the rumors about, like at La Quinta, don't they walk around with a big flag and announce once you've made it to a certain dollar level?
If they did that, I didn't see them do it.
I have heard that that's happened. I don't know if they still do it. But
I'm suspecting they're not doing that anymore because nobody really wants that. And people who do make an awful lot of money, they're always like a little afraid that people are going to be like jealous or envious.
You got to be quiet about it. I think
you got to be quiet about it.
I do know some of the artists that I hold at a certain, like, I know what they're doing. I know the numbers they're doing, and I do notice that they're like, the circle that they keep is their circle, and it's like, well, they're kind of surrounding the wagons, because they're keeping those people close, because it's like, you don't want to walk around. I mean, this is a weird business. You don't want to get out there and be like, hey, I just made X amount of dollars. And we're like, fuck you. I want to make X amount of dollars.
Right. So, I mean, here's the thing about that that's kind of silly is that everybody knows everybody else's business.
Right.
There's no secrets. All you have to do is watch.
Right.
That's great. Those people are always doing something that is so far from what I'm doing that I can't compare myself to, for like we're talking about like Daryl, that guy has really, like, he has figured out how to make art shows work. If you want to talk about it with him, you should.
Definitely.
He has things to tell you. I wish I would have known him 20 years ago or something like that.
Right.
But and like I say, that's not how I entered shows. And this is the thing you have to remember. And I do think we should preface that often when we're at shows, tragically, I know I speak for myself, we're not often our best selves.
It's true.
We often get there and we're already exhausted by the time we're set up there on the street. You have these expectations and people say weird things to you and the day goes by and maybe it was great and maybe it was bad. And you're just trying to cope with yourself as a human who's a sensitive person, because that's how you got here in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's really easy for people to mistake some of that pathos as something that can appear like envious or some kind of shitty feeling. And I don't think it is for people, because people have different expectations and they're doing different things. And even though we're all at the same venue, hoping for the same ends, some of us are playing slightly different games.
We definitely are. And you can't fault other people for their games. I think it's really cool to see that game. And like I was in, like when we were talking about Bayou City a few weeks back, and like Bayou City, the shows that make you set up in the middle of the night beforehand. It's
good Lord.
They're taking you off of your game. It's almost like you're starting out completely depleted. It's like, this is what you do though. Just suck it up and get used to it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Also, I may choose something else next time. It's just not going to be, the Daryl Thetford method is going to be rested and ready for the handful of shows that you choose,
And when he was talking to you about that on as a guest on the show, it really resonated with me because Cherry Creek was, I sold some stuff there, but I did not have the magic Cherry Creek show that a lot of people had.
Yeah.
And it was fine because Helen's show was wonderful, and it's all the same household. But by the time we got to that show, it's like we'd been away from home for 5 weeks. And it sounds like, you think about what we did. Well, we went out like camping for a week up in Idaho and you did this and that's a lot of fun. But when that's what you're doing between the work weekends, which are always long, and it's hot, you're living in your van sometimes and you're driving for days, you get exhausted.
You know, absolutely do.
I get really tired. When I leave to go to shows, I usually don't sleep very well for a long time, you know, and by the time we rolled into Cherry Creek with all that expectation, that I remember it was pretty hot and stuff when we're setting up hot. And it was incredibly hot.
There's the anxiety of like, is it going to work?
Yeah. So there's all that, you know, you got to remember like I'm really setting up 3 booths.
Yeah.
Okay. A double booth for Helen and then my own. And I was so exhausted and I was in such a sort of a fragile emotional state that I didn't help myself at that show. I didn't. It was, you know, it was weird. And then this is another thing for everybody listening is very important. You have to have your tall chair.
You do.
At all times. You do. Here's what happened to me a few years ago. And if they're listening, I got a bone to pick with you. My Earth Products chair that I had only bought maybe 2 years earlier, the seam on it like ripped out on the seat.
Oof.
Okay. And I'm not a heavy person.
No,
okay.
Yeah.
At all. And I'm like, what the heck? And I'm like, I don't have time to deal with this. So it just got tossed into the pile here in the basement. Right. And I was like, I just need a chair. And I'll take this small little red camping chair.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it. And I'd be sitting at a show and I'd be like, oh God, this is ridiculous. I need my tall chair. Helen has her tall chair. I don't have mine. And then like a few years go by and I just don't replace it. And then I get to Cherry Creek. I'm so tired. It's so hot that by 2 p.m, there's nobody. It's like a George Romero movie. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to sit in my gravity recliner. Not what you should be doing at an art fair.
I saw you sitting at that. I definitely thought about it. I was like, what the hell is he doing?
I was doing the wrong thing. So don't do that.
No.
Make sure that you have your tall chair at all times. I repaired my Earth Products chair.
Nice.
And I took that with me when we went to La Quinta.
Well, you got to do you know, you could do like Daryl does. I don't think Daryl ever sits down.
Yeah, I'm not Daryl.
Nobody is.
No, I'm not. And I watch him. He really doesn't.
He's super easygoing, but he's also got that Southern thing where he doesn't necessarily get overheated too. I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and I'm from the South, but not like the deep, you know, Tennessee, Alabama South where it gets this big, you know, it gets swampy, but like I'm trying to remember who my neighbor was, but we were at Manayunk and it was like 105 and somebody was like, man, you gotta slow down. You gotta just move at the pace of the heat of the day. Yeah. And it's like, just sit there and embrace your old Southerner in a strap, you know, nylon strap chair like your granddad would have and get your straw hat and just move real slow. But goddamn, it was hot.
Well, I don't really like the Western kind of dry desert heat, and then you throw in some altitude, and I'm just that cooks me. I actually prefer the humidity.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I thought I liked that dry heat until everything that every joint bleeds. Now that I'm in Santa Fe, my southern skin is just like, you know, I do all my shading with my hands, and so I just have these like thin black tattoo lines in my knuckles until I finally get south or go to the beach for a week or something like that. It's just
it's rough.
It is.
But you know, getting back to that though, it's really important to think about all these things when you're at a show. Don't sit in your gravity recliner.
No.
Even if you think it's real funny for a minute. Don't do that. And it could, because it is so hard, and everybody seems to be a way that they really aren't. And I feel like I really tuned into that this year because it was such an interesting show year. Many people were having really excellent shows, you know, and everybody suddenly was all like much more comfortable kind of interacting with each other and talking about their business. And I really even though I've been doing this for so long, for some reason, it just was really driven home to me this year. It's like, wow, so many people's expectations and what they're doing are so divergent.
Yeah.
They are so different. Like if I've ever been at a show feeling salty, it's not because I didn't make $40,000 like somebody down the street.
Right.
It's because I didn't make like my $8,000.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I know totally what you mean.
Because
I don't your own
I have
goal.
my own goal, my own expectations, vastly different. Like we are actually in different businesses. We have different audiences,
Right.
And everybody should just always be cool, just always be gracious.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling crabby, just do it.
Yeah.
Just let it out. Don't feel weird and don't feel all uptight about stuff and
don't try to play somebody else's game.
Don't try to play somebody else's game because you're not,
right.
And for me, this is really important. Thinking about artists who work in a way that I relate to myself, where you're kind of doing like a range of work and it's a new body of work. I think there used to be more artists that did that.
Yeah. And
the thing that has happened in the last 20 years, but particularly since 2008, when wealth has become kind of concentrated in another direction, you've sort of lost that middle part of the audience at art fairs.
Yep.
What it caused was a real demand and emphasis on large, bold work that can appeal to somebody who has fairly deep pockets and can also be somewhat more easily produced. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a weird, there's like it has to have the art fair gloss, the art fair presentation that you have to stand out to attract that type of buyer. And with that comes scale. Once you're playing that game, and you always want to do better, so it has to be developed in a way that you can actually keep up with the demand, because now you're doing really well, Right. With like, for me, it's always been like a lot of individual labored pieces, and I would always have so many like X amount of large pieces that I would be able to make.
Sure.
And I would always sell them. And by the end of the year, I'm like, okay, everything worked out. But with the kind of the way that the economics work, it has pushed art, like the art show. I mean, is any of what I'm saying making sense?
It is making a lot of sense, because I just watched your movie again that you made, and I was thinking about there's a commonality among the artists that you had on the film, and it is all of that kind of like, well, John Whipple will have a body of work that changes, but it is a cohesive body of work whenever you see it. And he talks a little bit about, well, you get down to the end of the season, you got this from that last, and it looks like a hodgepodge. It never does. It always looks like Whipple. He does amazing work, but I think he's able to continue to do art shows because where he's changing the body of work, he's always creating, and he can get down in it and produce like the current series of faces and heads, and it's just an incredible body of work to look at the different changes that are happening. But he is changing, so I think that keeps him from getting run down, But each one of those artists that you talked to, whether it was the Kempers, Jillian and Kemper, which I think is awesome that she calls her own son Kemper.
I know, it's pretty funny. Yeah.
But, you've got John and Lynn, they're all creating their bodies of work that they have this integrity to, not duplicating necessarily, and always changing too. So it's an interesting.
Yeah.
And not to say that the people that do, because I certainly repeat imagery.
I also,
it's just a different game.
It is a different game. And I actually would consider what you do as, and I don't even know if people are doing it conscientiously, but as an acknowledgement of what the actual demands of the market are.
Right.
Like I consider you to be an example of the type of show artist who can easily grab that type of consumer who is showing up with the money to spend. You know, your things are pretty bold. They're pretty large.
Yeah.
They have a real like slick presentation.
People
can walk down.
Yeah.
You can walk down the street and there's no ambiguity about it. It's like, there it is right there, you know, and this was the error that I made in this last like 2 years. And because I understand that, but because I was left alone to do whatever the heck I wanted, I started making these things that I really liked that had this like real textured, you know, kind of subtle layer and, you know, material usage that all is so like, it's raw, but it's kind of thoughtfully put together, and it all became like kind of small.
Yeah.
And not very bold. And the large pieces that I did make, when you're just passing by on the street, they don't look like anything interesting. You know, it doesn't occur to you that, oh, I got to walk up there and look and like, oh my gosh, these things are cut out and this thing is covered in this staples and it's covered in paint. And there's like this little line in the space between the things that I stuck together, and like none of that. You're not getting that. You're just walking down the street and you're like, oh man, here's the big stuff over here.
Right.
Bam, bam, bam. This guy is this quiet little weenie over here. He's in his own little world of,
well, this guy's over in his own little world. Meanwhile, your next door neighbor has literal mustaches that you can ride and bananas. You know?
Right. So for some reason, like the culture of art shows and the way that art is successfully presented and sold on the street has skewed in this large direction. Yeah. You know, this large, slick, non-ambiguous direction. Like there can't be much question about what you're looking at. And if there is, it has to make a lot of sense as soon as you enter the booth and start looking.
Right.
You know, and I, in my weird highbrow fine art with a capital F, conflicted with a guy who wishes he could draw like Boris Vallejo world, I started like doing the kind of the opposite thing, even though I know better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dylan, for that great talk today. Next episode, I'm sitting down with Helen Gottlieb, and the following week, we'll finish this interview with Dylan, where he talks all about his film, The Life We Make.
Hey, we got a letter to the podcast, or an email, whatever you want to call it, but a topic that was interesting, a show basing the success off of their show this past year. They're now adding another show, and they wanted to get our thoughts on that.
They didn't want us to be specific about names. We don't need to necessarily name the show, but what do we think about basing any decisions into next year, adding a show based on the results of this coming out of hiding?
Right.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about it, Will?
You know, honestly, it kind of depends on the area. I know there are a few, not lots of, but like take Rittenhouse Square.
Yeah.
I have done just as well in June as I have in September there.
Okay.
And Philly, you know, it's Philly. Mm-hmm. It's right in the heart of downtown Philly, and they can support it. Mm-hmm. So you have to take your area into
the demographics, the size, the art buying crowd, all that stuff needs to be.
Is it a vacation area? Is it the same people vacationing? Are you selling to people all around the country? I mean, you have to take everything into account when you're looking at whether or not the area can support it. Okay, take Artisphere, for example. Artisphere is an amazing show in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, that keeps their artist numbers pretty much parallel with the community size. Oh. You've got like 85, 90, no more than 100 ever artists at Artisphere. Okay. And that's the number that community can support. And that, I think, is why it's so damn good. So look at your community, and it's like, well, there are a lot of shows in like Naples, and people talk about it being overfished. But the counter to that is the fact that these are different groups of tourists that are coming down into Naples. So you're fishing a different pond every single time. So I don't know. It depends on the area. What do you think?
I think it's really tricky because you can just totally water things down. There has to be a lot of thought put into it. None of us want to see a strong show in a time slot that's good go down the tubes because it gets diluted, right? Because it's going to happen twice a year now. So,
right.
I guess we have to put the trust in the organizers. We know that they're not just going to, we hope, not just going to throw up another show just to throw up another show.
Right.
If they are invested in the success of the show, not just being on the backs of artist booth fees, then that is a whole different story too, because really the success of the sales is what is going to be the success of the show. So I don't know where to go with it from there. It's just, it makes me nervous.
It makes me nervous too, and I will voice the opinion of somebody who we know and trust. I'm not going to drop him by name just because we have not asked, but his opinion was that you can't base anything off of last year.
Yeah.
Last year was a complete misnomer. It was completely bonkers.
Right.
Shows were happening or not happening. The ones that had been incredibly successful. The areas that were that had shut down seem to be have a lot more hunger for the art shows. I don't know. Don't base anything off of last year. It's like you take the high and you take the low and you throw them out. And you got to throw last year out. Like you just can't base any opinion on what happened last year.
And I have to say too, some of my experiences at first seemed extremely high, like extremely great right out of the gate. But things started to kind of level off a bit where people are like, well, this one had hit them out of the park and this one had a 0. And we're like, yeah, that's kind of like a show when we say, how did you do? I did okay. I did great. I did 0. It's like, yeah, now the results are kind of getting back to what we used to know.
So you think your shows are kind of leveling out? Is that what you're saying?
A bit. Yeah, I would say so.
Huh. Interesting. I think these towns that canceled their shows, that have not had a big event for a number of months or things, those are the ones that are coming out and really doing a good job. So we'll see how it goes.
Let's hope you have a great one in Chicago. Have a safe drive and sell lots and have a good time with friends. And we'll see you next time on the podcast here, Will.
Thank you, buddy. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
It's already Thanksgiving, though, past.
Oh, yeah. Fuck it. Have a good one.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, check out Will's website at willarmstrongart.com and my website at sigworthglass.com.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.